What we do is we have social norms of how we divide it up. We could have divided it up fundamentally differently.
Hilary, people call you an anti-realist. Do you like that term or non-realist?
Yeah, I wouldn't see myself as an anti-realist. I think it's paradoxical. You can't deny reality without it seeming to be deny itself. If you say, there is no truth, is there no truth that there is no truth? So anti-realism doesn't make much sense to me. It's about providing an alternative idea of how we might hold reality. And sometimes I use the phrase non-realist. There have been some people who've described me as para-realist, but I just leave that.
As in paralogic?
Yes.
You're all contradictory.
Well, just in the sense that it's going beyond realism, in the sense that I don't think that the idea that we can reach through to decide reality is plausible. I don't think we've got a decent account of that. And indeed, the accounts that have been put forward, I think, are paradoxical. So I don't think you can do that. We have to build an alternative account of how it is that our theories about the world work, even though we can't reach through and describe it, which is what closure theory is really all about, is how is this possible?
And your answer to that?
And the answer is that I think we have to give up the idea that reality is already differentiated into bits, as it were, and think of reality as being a space of potential which we can close in a whole number of different ways. And those different ways enable us to intervene. But we can't describe what it is that's ultimately going on that. What we can do is work according to those closures. And at the surface of it, I think people think, well, there must be some connection between our closures and what's out there, because why would they work? But that's a mistake. And I try to demonstrate why it's such a profound mistake, and why actually we don't need truth in order to get our closures to work.
And so is that a radical empiricist?
I wouldn't describe it as a radical empiricist, because empiricists usually have the idea that they can somehow reach through to the data. And I don't think there is data that we can reach through to. As your namesake Kuhn identified with paradigms, that every way that we frame data has to be in a bigger overall theory. So I don't think you can get through to the data. So in that sense, I'm not an empiricist. But I do think that we operate within these closures and we seek to refine them. And we are able to refine them to get them to work better, but they don't describe reality. And in proposing this, it's not the wild, crazy views of a philosopher. Stephen Hawking, 10 years after I published Closure, argued for model-dependent realism. And there's a lot of parallel between Closure and that idea of model-dependent realism, that we can't get at reality outside of our models.
The limitation that you talk about, is that epistemological or ontological?
Well, the very idea of epistemology is based on the notion that there's some stuff out there, and how do we have knowledge? That's students across the Western world taught epistemology. I think epistemology is a nonsense. We don't have any knowledge. And therefore, the idea of questioning, well, how do we have knowledge, is not going to have a foundation. We can't explain, as it were, how we get knowledge from the stuff out there. I think we can give an account of how within our closures, our ways of creating identity in the world, we can give an account of how that enables us to do something. Yes, we can do that.
What then is the cause of the limitation?
I think interesting your point about limitation. It is certainly the case there is constraint on the closures or the identities that we can make. So, and I had this conversation yesterday with Steven Pinker. And you can take any object immediately around us, this glass, and you can hold it in an indefinite number of ways. You could hold it as a collection of silicon atoms, as an example in a conversation, as a weapon. There's no limit to the number of ways we can close, this bit of the world. But that doesn't mean to say that, as it were, anything will go. It's not as if we can say, it's a rhinoceros, or if it is, we've got to try hard to get that closure to work. And so there is constraint, but the constraint is to do with whether our closure is effective, whether it works for us. It's not a constraint in the sense of, are we naming the thing out there? And
is there something out there?
There is absolutely. I was going to say there's absolutely something out there in this sense, that I am a realist in the notion that I think there is something other than us which constrains our frameworks that we use to understand the world. So I am a realist in that sense. Philosophically, I think realist usually has come to mean a linguistic realist, that somehow our theories or language refer to the stuff out there. So I am critical of linguistic realism or theoretical realism. I absolutely do not hold the idea that somehow it's all in our heads. I'm not an idealist. I'm a realist in that sense, just in the same way as Hawking uses the word model-dependent realism. So I'm a realist in that sense. I think there is stuff out there. I hesitated in response to your question, is there something out there? Because I think the word thing has already identified the nature of what might be out there. It's sort of like, oh, it's something. Well, actually, I think what we do with closure is we create identities. And so we are, as it were, creating the things. And when we say, is there something out there, that's really carrying through the underlying idea of what we're doing with language.
So if you remove language, we don't call it a thing, there is some fundamental reality. I mean, it seems self-evident.
There is something other than us. So there's stuff out there.
Okay.
But I would call that stuff out there, to avoid calling it anything particular that carries through the metaphors from our other bits of language. I usually refer to it as the openness of the world, as a place of potential. We can't, I think, say anything about that place of potential, its actual characteristics. That's not what language does. And sometimes I use the example of, in our experience, I think we have layers of closure. So the first bit, to use neuroscientific language, the neurons in the eye close the openness of the world. They've got the whole openness of the world, and they do two things. They either fire or they don't fire. They don't have any other way of doing it. That's the only two things they do to the whole of the bit of the world. So they close the openness of the world into either they fire or they don't fire, and they create that identity. Now, we don't think that that identity is out there in the world, do we? We don't think that somehow the firing of the neuron is describing a universe of firing neurons.
Right, but something triggered the firing.
But, well, the thing is the bit. There is undoubtedly something other than us, and I put that something in quotes.
I'm not using the word thing anymore. You disabused me of things, so I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. But there is an other to us, as it were. Yes, for sure.
And that is triggering the neurons.
And that is triggering the neurons.
Okay.
Yes.
We're there.
But as soon as you use the word that, you then start to imagine that it's like a physical object, because that's our primary notion of what it is as a physical object. And I think one has to avoid that, which is why I refer to openness. We just have to think of the world as open, and not move to somehow describing it as a thing or made up of things, or as if there's a correct answer to naming those things. What there is there's a space of potential which is actually infinitely rich, and we close it in specific ways, and they enable us to do all sorts of stuff.
Hilary, your theory of closure, how can that be used to address the classical question of what is truth? How do we know what is true?
Well, I think there are different ways in which we use the word truth. I think people usually imagine that what we're referring to truth is some absolute objective truth about the nature of the world out there. And I don't think we can do that. I think that is illusory. But within any given frame, we can have ways of holding that which are more effective than others, and we can refer to that as truth. But in addition to that, I think I'd like to make some distinctions about the ways in which we use truth. So I think there's a sort of what I refer to as existential truth, which is that if you hold something in a certain way, like those pictures that you can see different ways, the duck rabbit,
right.
When you hold it as a duck, it is for you existentially true that there is a duck there. And so if we can realize a closure, as I would describe it in the framework that I've given, if we realize an identity, then that is true for us at that moment. Now, we have social truth, which is what everyone else agrees is a way to hold something. And our existential truth may not be the same as a social norm that people hold. And of course, the idealized objective truth is the idea that, well, people who've got the full knowledge of the situation at a time have no choice but to hold it this way.
Right. So you disagree with that?
So I don't think there is an idealized that people with the full knowledge will have to hold it in a given way. Actually, since the start of human civilization, humans have had difficulty in agreeing on almost anything, and the idea that somehow they are going to agree on something permanently is an illusion. They will have different ways of holding the world, and there's not some one way that you might be able to hold.
But that speaks to human distinctions. That doesn't speak to an ultimate reality. In other words, 99% of humans can just get it wrong. I mean, the fact that humans have a social consensus or not consensus, that's irrelevant to the nature of reality.
Well, I don't think that you can reach through to the nature of reality and say, well, they just get it wrong. Parents often do this with a child. You know, we are inculcating a child as they grow up with our ways of holding the world. So I don't know whether you have any children, but a common experience with children is that they may get to know what a bus means, and they start to call all sorts of things a bus. They'll call a car a bus. They'll call a toy a bus. You know, everything becomes a bus. And what do? We move in and we say, no, that's not a bus. That's a car. So we're just correcting their closure. Previously, what they're doing is holding these things as one thing. They hold the toy, and they hold the car and the bus, all as a bus. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. It is possible to do that. That's their existential truth. What we do is we have social norms of how we divide it up. We could have divided it up fundamentally differently. There's no limit to the number of ways we could divide the world.
The number of windows that it has, or the number of wheels.
Yes, exactly. And it's much more radical than we imagine. You know, we sort of imagine, well, we could just choose different details. We could just hold it completely differently. So, you know, we can hold this glass as a weapon. If you hold it as a weapon, you see it as a different thing. It's not like a different detail, it's a different thing. And you might say, is it a good weapon? Is it a bad weapon? Where did this weapon come from? What can you use this weapon for? You have a whole logic of that way of holding the world, weapon. Most of the time, we think of it as a glass. Which is it really? Is it really a glass? Well, social norm, normally we think of it as a glass, but it's not. It's not as if there is one way to close the world. There's an indefinite number of ways. And within those ways of closing the world, you can then have the equivalent of truth, as it were. You can say, well, this glass is quite hard. So
those are facts.
They are facts within the context of that closure. So within the context of government institutions, we can say that the current president of the United States is Trump. But that doesn't mean to say that that's the only way of describing this structure or what's going on in
But if
America.
that glass were a weapon or a vehicle to quench thirst, it would still be hard. It would still be physically hard. It would still have that same characteristic. So that fact would transcend all the different structures of it.
I think it's not as straightforward as that. I think that as you shift those, so in the conversation I was having with Steven Pinker, he said, well, Hilary, it couldn't be a hamster. This was in the conversation we were having recently. And I said, well, actually, I think we can hold this as a hamster because it needs to be fed to be useful. And you might find, well, it's a bit of a jump, that metaphor, Hilary, to saying that this is a hamster. But you sort of get the idea, don't you? In a sense, in order for it to be useful, it needs to be fed. And then we could start using the word hamster for everything that needs to be fed. And in no time at all, you've got all sorts of hamsters in the world. Is it then hard? I think, well, you might not categorize that way of holding the world as hard and soft. You'd be thinking about it, is it a useful hamster or not? Okay. So I think you can't really get through to the data independently of the way that you're holding it.
Does closure force you into a relative morality as opposed to an objective morality?
Well, of course, I don't think there's anything objective about morality. If I don't think there's anything objective about the physical world, I'm obviously not going to think there's anything objective about morality. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't make closures which say, I want to hold this as good and I want to hold this as bad. It's a way of intervening. It's a way of trying to frame things.
But it puts less pressure to have a consensus.
There is, yes, there might be in occasions less pressure to have consensus, but sometimes I think I'm frequently misunderstood as somehow I'm saying that anything goes. I don't remotely think that anything goes. It is really hard to find new ways of holding the world, new metaphors, which are useful and effective, and we refine them. That was Hawking's point. He used to have the idea that we could find a story of everything, that you just get it all together and you sort it. And then he got to a point, no, you can't sort it, because the only stuff we've got are models in his vocabulary, and so that's just how it is. Now, what I was really trying to do with the theory of closure was to demonstrate how it is that we can have useful and effective ways of intervening in the world, even though we don't have truth. And so it's not that somehow we can allow anything to happen. In fact, in a way, I want to double down on looking at the world, on observation and empiricism and reason, but within the context of recognizing that we're operating with a closure. We're not operating with truth.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.